This is just to let everybody know, this is my first time really doing anything like this. I was approached by Todd a couple weeks ago, and he asked me if I would speak. And this is, like I said, out of my comfort zone. This is not what I normally do. I do better at one-on-one conversations with everybody, not really preaching or speaking in front of large groups. But it's one of those things that you have to get out of your comfort zone. You got to get rid of yourself and let God step in. And so today I'm going to title of the message, I guess, if you want to call it that, is called, originally it was called Doing What You're Told, but Todd would like it. But I think it's more so doing what you're called to do. Last week, Todd talked about being set apart or set up. Today we're going to look at somebody that was definitely set up originally, and he was then set apart for God, and definitely had a big part on our faith today. We're going to look at Paul. He started out his life with a lot of violence, a lot of hatred towards people, religious folks, who he would persecute all those who were for God. And then God met him on the road, blinded him, set him on the right path. And I think it's kind of funny how we're all in that same part. We all start out on that road, and we're not all blinded, but we all come to see the light one way or the other. But today we're looking at his journey. He had just left. He had been running through the lands, preaching to or teaching and ministering to the Gentiles and Jews along the way. But he's on his way back to Jerusalem now. He was called to bring the story of salvation through Jesus, and not just to the Gentiles, not just to those that were near him, but to all folks, Jews, Gentiles, the Greeks, all the ones along the way. And so he had, we're reading in Acts 21. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. I'm not going to go through and read the entire thing. But he had landed in Tyre. And I honestly had to look up some of these names because I don't know how to say them all. I know, but he ran into the disciples after landing there in Tyre. And so we're reading Acts 21, and we're going to start in verse 4, about halfway through verse 4. And it says, let's see. Sorry, halfway through verse 3. It said, it landed in Tyre, and our ship was to unload its cargo. So we sought out the disciples there and stayed with them 7 days. Through the Spirit, they urged Paul not to go into Jerusalem. But when it was time to leave, we left and continued on our way. All of them, including wives and children, accompanied us out of the city. There on the beach, we knelt to pray, saying goodbye to each other. We went aboard the ship, and they returned home. So he had landed in Tyre. They offloaded some of the cargo, and he met with the disciples for a little bit and hung out with them for a little while. They were probably talking just like we normally do today. They were hanging out, just talking about the things of their life, what's going on. He was probably telling them about how, hey, I was just up there talking to all these other folks about Jesus. We were telling the stories and everything. But then it said they urged him. In verse 4, it says, through the Spirit, they urged Paul not to go into Jerusalem. And that stuck out to me because it's if Paul is called to do something, why would he then be urged by the Spirit not to? And it's one of those things where we're all led by the Spirit in different ways. So the path that we're set on, that I'm set on, might not be the same path that you guys are set on. And so we have to make sure that we're staying true to our path. And in this story, Paul was being led to Jerusalem. The disciples there were being led back home. That's where they went. The Spirit was telling them, hey, You stay home, you minister to your folks there. Paul's mission was a little bit larger than that. He was going back to Jerusalem. He was going back to a place that was not advantageous to him. It was not a happy place. And I think the Spirit could sense that, and it was speaking to the disciples. But we have to make sure that we're staying on our path, and also in that same moment, we got to make sure that we're not inadvertently leading others off of their path set before them. So we need to make sure that it's not about not talking to folks, because I mean that's going to happen. But we got. I think there's a spirit of discernment that we're all dealt with, and you got to learn how to interpret that for yourself. And so again, make sure you're staying on your true calling to God, and also let's make sure we're not inadvertently leading people off with our calling. And so after that, after they sailed out from Tyre, they landed at Ptolemais, and they traveled on to Caesarea. And that it's fine. It's fine. I appreciate it. When he traveled there, he ran into a prophet. And again, this was another time where he was Paul was led, or Paul was tried to deterred off of his path. The prophet in Acts 21, and we're reading 10, he said, after we had been there a number of days, so that this was after they had traveled to Caesarea, said, after we had been there a number of days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. Coming over to us, he took Paul's belt, and he tied his own hands and feet with it, and said, the Holy Spirit says, in this way the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem will bind the owner of this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles. When we heard this, we and the people there pleaded with Paul not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, why are you weeping and breaking my heart? I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. When he would not be dissuaded, we gave up and said, the Lord's will be done. So, yet again, you had others that were set on different paths. Paul knew his path. Paul knew what was ahead, but he trusted God that his will would be done. He knew that his will was more important than what Paul would potentially suffer. And he had a love for Jesus that not only was he willing to be bound, and not only was he willing to suffer from punishment that he technically didn't deserve, he was ready to die just so that he could be a witness, just so that he could tell his story. And we too are called to be witnesses. We're called to share our story. Later on, we'll hear that was what he was going to do when he got to Jerusalem, was just to tell his story. And that's all it takes, is for us to just stand up and tell our story. And so we can't let what could potentially be stop us from doing that. We'll read on it, and well, I'm not going to read it. I'll let you guys go back and read it. Acts 21:17 through 26. I'll also say, if you haven't read this and y'all like a good story, Acts 21 through 26, it talks about Paul's arrest and his trials. It's a good Lifetime story. If any of y'all want to watch one in words, it's a really good one. It's got its ups and downs. It's really good. But Paul had reached Jerusalem. So he traveled on from Caesarea, and he traveled on into Jerusalem. He ran into James, who was the brother of Jesus. He was the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And James had told Paul that there were a lot of rumors going around in Jerusalem, that he was teaching against the law of Moses. And so it was taboo in their custom. They were against it. It was and it was a lie. It was not what Paul was doing. Paul was merely teaching that Jesus had come to and fulfilled the law. and that he was the true salvation. And so Paul, who was a man of strong convictions, he was strong. He was a powerful man, um, but he knew that God's message was more important than his pride. And so he took it upon himself to join in with their some of their customs, which was to purify themselves. So he joined in with a bunch of guys. They purified themselves. They shaved their heads, uh, and so he presented himself to the Jewish leaders as a clean person, saying, "This is not who I am. These are false rumors. They're not what they're saying." But he let go of himself in order to join in with them, to meet them at their level. Um, and so I think that's where we should not be so absolved with ourselves and with our own pride, and with our own way of looking at the world, to where we can't meet people at their level. So like we get so caught up with religion, with faith. We can't get so caught up with our religion, with the way we believe, that we we can't sit down and meet people at their level. Whether that means meeting them on the bad side of town, whether that means meeting them at a bar to talk with them there, whether that means meeting them, you know, wherever they are. That's where we need to do that. We need to go to the folks, tell them our story, and let God do the rest of it. Um, and so moving on from there, like I said, Paul submitted to the custom, but that didn't matter to them. In their minds, they had already decided that he was wrong, that he had not followed their law, and that he was unfit. And so when they began to beat him. They put hands on him. They seized him. This is all in Acts 21 verse 27 up through Acts 22 verse 21. Um, they they seized him. They beat him. Um, and the whole city got enthralled with it. The entire city was brought out. They were all enticed and were my words are leaving me. They were all brought out. Uh, Basically, it was made a circus out of beating Paul and out of making a show of it. Um, the Roman guards came in, and they actually took over and arrested Paul. And from there, he he asked the Roman soldiers that if he could speak to the people. Um, and so at this one moment, he got to speak to basically the entire city. And all he did was tell his story. He told a story about how he was going against God, and then God met him on the road, and God turned his life around. And so, with that being said, we are always going to have opposition in our life. We're going to have opposition to telling our story. We're going to have folks that are not going to like what we have to say. They're not going to like what they're hearing, um, and but we can't let that stop us from doing what God has called us to do. Even if all of that was done for the one person, if one person was only if only one person heard that, then it was worth it, right? Um, I know the day I don't remember the exact day, but I remember the feeling, um, and for me to share my story and to get others into that feeling, into the conversation with God, into the meeting of God, and where they can experience Him where they're at. I feel as though any opposition that I have getting to that point is no, it doesn't matter. Because if one person can come to be saved through my embarrassment, then it's worth it, right? And so, but that's what we're all called to do. That's what we're all called to do. We're all called to share our story, whether that is in front of an entire city, whether it's in front of a room of folks like this, or whether it's one-on-one with, with your child at home. We all share. We all have that calling in our life. We all have a job to do, and we need to make sure that we're staying on point with that. Some are called to be missions around the world. Some are called to preach to millions on a stage. I'm not that person. Some are called to tell just one person. But we're all trying to win as many souls to Christ as possible. And I want to make sure that we stay on point with that.